Hi, this is Eric Sloof over at ntpro.nl. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to design your NSX management network. We will discuss multi-site, we will discuss disaster recovery, and we will discuss what happens when the connection is lost between the wide area network, and we will also discuss what happens when one of your NSX managers in the primary data center is lost. So what do we have? Let's go from top to bottom. We have three manager instances, NSX manager 1, 2, and 3. You notice that the leader VIP is running here. The leader VIP means that this guy is the leader. It's an election and the leader is able or allowed to host the virtual IP address. It's not really a load balancer. It's simply putting the VIP address on one of the instances and then all the client connections will go to the VIP. So this is only availability. This is not scalability. It doesn't spread the requests of the client over the instances. Every single request goes to the leader VIP. Okay. So what else do we have? We also have a few transport nodes. 4 transport nodes on site A, 3 on site B. When you are adding a transport node to and you're joining the NSX manager, then this process is called sharding, and then you will get automatically an instance of one of the NSX managers. So they are divided between those NSX managers equally. It's like a round robin method, and every NSX manager will host about roughly the same amount of transport nodes. So what are they hosting? They're hosting routing tables, they're hosting configurations of switches, they're hosting the central control plane, the MAC tables, the tab tables, the IP tables. So this is responsibility for the NSX manager on behalf of those transport nodes. We don't have any locality. So it doesn't mean if your ESXi host runs on site B, you're automatically managed by NSX Manager 3. It depends. It depends where your sharding process will put your transport node. Your transport node can be easily placed on NSX Manager 1 or 2, even though you're on site B. There's no locality. Okay, so far so good. These blue dots right here, those are the tunnel endpoints. And tunnel endpoints are used to encapsulate traffic into the overlay network. So when a VM generates traffic, it goes into Geneve, it's encapsulated in overlay, and then it's decapsulated on this host and it flows into the other VM. We can also see a LCP with a local ARP, and this LCP, this local control plane, will get an updated list of the ARP table, MAC table, and IP table from the NSX manager where he's hosted. Okay, so what will happen when we're patching a host? This host is in maintenance and we lose the one connection. That's the question. What will happen? What do you think? Does this NSX manager have a majority? The answer is no, because he's alone. He's not connected to the NSX management network anymore. At least he's not able to see the other instances. This guy was in maintenance mode. So this guy is also alone. So when you put a host in maintenance mode and you lose the wide area connection, you will lose your complete cluster. Single point of failure during patching of an NSX manager is the connection to your site B. If you have a very stable connection, it doesn't matter. But if this is a remote location, you could argue and say, well, maybe I want to put this instance alongside the 3 others to minimize the risk that I lose the network connectivity between site A and site B while putting a host in maintenance. If you don't have any maintenance at all, it's all good. So if you have if you lose this connection and these two hosts are still up, if this host is still up and running and this host is still up and running, then you still have a majority and you're able to manage the hosts on side A. Not on side B, because this connection is gone. This host will bring itself down. It will step out of the cluster. So in case you lose if you lose side A completely, then you don't have a majority at all, but side B is still up and running. Side B will step out of the cluster, but there is a special command that you can use to disjoin the cluster manually and then convert this host into a standalone host. And when you have a standalone host, then you are able to manage your ESXi hosts. If you can reach these guys, you can manage them too. That's no problem at all. And you can simply deploy a new appliance from this singleton appliance, a second and a third instance, and then you have your management cluster back. So if you look at you have the RTO and the RPO. If you look at the time you need to bring this NSX manager back in order after you lose NSX manager 1 and 2, you can do it within 10 minutes. You have to detect that both managers are down. Then you have to issue some command line things, and then this will be a standalone host, and you can create new instances of NSX Manager. That's the benefit of placing your third NSX Manager on a remote site. There is an alternative. So if you don't have your NSX Manager standalone, you can simply deploy a new ESXi host or a new NSX manager and put a backup on there, and then you can restore it from your backup that was written to FTP. I give you one heads up. If you want to use this mechanism, you can already deploy an NSX manager until the point where it asks you for, do you want to restore a backup or do you want to join an existing deployment? And that's the point where you switch off the machine and you leave it like it is, powered off, and wait until you have your disaster. Then you don't have to deploy that machine by hand. You don't have to download an OVA file. It's already there. You simply restore the backup and then you have your NSX manager from last night. So there is an alternative. You're not forced to put one of your managers in the remote data center for making sure that you still have your network configuration safe. But if you want to do it quickly, you want to bring it up quickly up and running, then this is a use case, definitely. But the downside still is when you patch in your NSX manager, your wide area network becomes a single point of failure. So what happens when your transport nodes are not connected to an NSX manager anymore? Do you lose virtual machine to virtual machine communications? Can I do a vMotion? Can I power on VMs? Well, that's an interesting question, and we have to look at how NSX Manager is using ARP suppression to make sure that the overlay network is not getting too much broadcast traffic from ARP requests that come from a VM. In order to explain this a little bit more in depth, I've prepared a whiteboard where I will explain what ARP suppression is. So what do we have with ARP suppression? When VM A wants to communicate with VM B, VM A knows the target IP address. He knows to which VM he wants to go, but he doesn't know the MAC address. So when this VM wants to set up unicast with this VM, he is going to issue an ARP request because he wants to retrieve this ARP request. Normally, that ARP request will go to every single VM on the same subnet, so attached to the same segment. And one of the VMs eventually will answer and say, I have that IP address, here's my MAC address. And then the MAC address is going back to this VM, and then they can set up unicast. But you can imagine if you have a very big data center with lots of VMs, you don't want to have this overhead of all those VMs generating ARP requests when they want to communicate with another VM. So what VMware did is that they say, okay, we're going to suppress ARP requests. We will try to answer those ARP requests from a central database. And that's where the central management plane kicks in. Every transport node is managed by the central management plane, and when someone powers on a VM on a host, then this VM is automatically registered in the local control plane, and then the local control plane will send that new VM into the central control plane. The central control plane will synchronize those ARP tables, MAC tables, tab tables, IP tables, to other NSX Manager instances. And when another host has a question, he will receive an updated version of this MAC table, tab table, and IP table, and then those questions are served from the local control plane. This entry will stay for roughly 300 seconds. 300 seconds to be precise. So when you register a VM after powering it on, it will have an entry in the MAC table, tab table, and IP table for 300 seconds. After 300 seconds, the TTL, the time to live, has expired, and then that entry will be removed from that table. So what happens when VM A wants to communicate with VM B, but he doesn't find an entry in the central control plane? Well, then we have ARP flooding still suppressed, but this tunnel IP, tunnel endpoint, will do a request on behalf of this VM. This tunnel endpoint will ask other transport nodes, hey guys, do you have this 192.168.111? Are you hosting this VM? And they will do a local ARP request to the VMs on that host. And one of them says, yeah, I'm hosting 192.168.111. Here's the MAC address. And then this tab will send an answer back over the overlay network to this tab address. And then he knows what the remote MAC address is. This address will be registered in the local control plane and will be shared with the central control plane. So any future requests for VMB will be served from the central control plane. But it's only limited. It will stay there for 300 seconds, for 5 minutes, and then it will vanish from those tables. So we still have flooding, but it's done by the tunnel endpoints. So what happens if I lose the connection to my control cluster? Well, I've spoken to some people over at VMware and asked them, what are you doing? Because the documentation is not really very elaborate on this. I found something in an NSX-T design guide which tells me that when the central control plane is down in the NSX-T environment, ARP requests are handled by flooding. So it's still flooding those requests to other tunnel endpoints to ESXi hosts in the same subnet. So it means that you don't have a tab table, you don't have an IP table, you don't have a MAC table. You have to do everything yourself. And all the tabs in the same subnet are still known, and they are automatically contacted if there is a request for a MAC address on a VM on another host than the VM that runs local. So we still have some flooding of ARP requests when the management plane is down. I've asked VMware, how long do you keep those ARP entries in your cache? And some people would say 30 minutes. Some people will say we put them in indefinite. It's not really clear. What is clear is that you're not able to power on any VMs anymore, and you're not able to migrate any VMs with vMotion. So when you've lost your control cluster, you are not able to create new ports on your switch, and that's why you are not able to power on VMs and use vMotion. Local machines will always find each other. If the NSX controller is down, then VMA is still able to reach VMB by using flooding over the transport network. I've spoken to someone at VMware and he told me that they were running this situation for a week. So they don't have an NSX manager in their network at all, and they still had all the virtual machines being able to communicate with each other. As long as two VMs are constantly talking to each other, they constantly refresh the entry in the ARP table. And if you have a VM that was silent for a while and starts communicating again, then we can use flooding to discover the other VMs. So locally, we always will have VM to VM traffic, even on another host, but we will have a lot of extra overhead because we need to send every single ARP request over the overlay network. That's what I was able to reproduce in my lab environment. It's not written in any documentation. You have to find it out yourself, but it seems to work. So with that in mind, we can go to a situation where we have the following. We have 3 NSX Manager instances and they're all running on site A. Okay. So when I put this guy into maintenance mode, I'm losing NSX Manager 1 and I have a subsequent failure of my wide area connection, I still have a majority of NSX managers. So the big benefit of placing NSX managers on one side is availability. When you are in a patching round and you lose your wide area connection, you still have your NSX management cluster available. It's a bit more complicated than that. So let's go into this situation. What we see is that we have these NSX Manager instances. These guys are not hosted here anymore because these are remote and these instances are not able to reach the management cluster. They have to rely on flooding, but that doesn't matter. We just saw that flooding is okay when you have multiple ESXi hosts running as a transport node in one site. Then they are able to communicate with their peer VMs locally on site B. They're not able to communicate with any other VMs on site A because they're not able to learn which tunnel endpoints there are anymore. If these tunnel endpoints are in a different subnet, then flooding is not used. So there is a good use case for putting all your all your transport nodes in the same subnet, because then you are able to flood your requests to the remote site. So even if the WAN connection between the NSX managers and the transport node is lost for management, and you still have your VLAN up and running for overlay, you are able to reach those VMs. But in most cases, people are using a different rack, different locations, different top of rack switches, and they put different IP addresses on these instances. They put it in a different subnet. So again, the big benefit of using or placing your NSX manager in your site A is when you put a host in maintenance, you are able to lose the one connection. You're not able to lose a subsequent failure of an NSX manager, because if you don't have a majority anymore, then you don't have your control plane. Your control plane will die, including your UI and everything. The only thing you can do is log on to your NSX manager locally and then disjoin the cluster, create a singleton NSX manager instance, and then deploy the additional NSX managers. And again, if you want to survive a complete site failure and you are losing site A as a whole, then you can take your ready to run NSX Manager on site B. You can put your backup on there. Then you have your singleton NSX Manager instance, and you can deploy a second and a third instance, and you have your NSX Manager cluster back up and running. And when the connection to your management network is established, you can also add these transport nodes to that NSX Manager cluster and vMotion them back to the site A. So just a little recap. If you ask VMware, where do I place my NSX managers? They say, well, it doesn't really matter. Keep in mind, locality is a myth. If you have no network connection at all, the NSX manager on site B is not managing any local transport nodes there. As soon as site B will lose the majority, this guy will step down and he will not manage any transport nodes anymore. This is not a read-only NSX manager. A read-only NSX manager doesn't exist. We have to rely on the local control plane. The local control plane is able to serve an ARP cache, and this ARP cache is used as long as we don't have any central control plane. So we can use direct flooding between tunnel endpoints, and this mechanism allows me to keep communications up between VMs on the same site. Again, powering on a VM is not possible when you don't have a connection to an NSX manager, a working NSX manager, because NSX manager is responsible for connecting that VM to the switch. vMotion, migrating a VM from one host to the other host, is also not possible because you have to create a new port on the switch on the other host. And again, we need to have NSX Manager involved to allocate and free up that port for that VM. So it has nothing to do with, I don't know where this VM is. We know where the VMs are. We are using local flooding to discover the VMs. It can be a benefit to put these tunnel endpoints in the same subnet. On the other hand, you have to realize that if you are allowing flooding from site A to site B, you are eating a big bandwidth away from the same bandwidth used by your VMs. So broadcast is not avoided for fun by VMware. Broadcast traffic is huge. It's very demanding. It's unpredictable. What about predictability? That's another interesting discussion here. If this connection is, if your management connection is slow between these data centers, so if this connection is a slow connection, do you want to manage your NSX instances, your transport nodes, on a remote NSX manager? Do you want to have clients connecting over the management network to the leader IP on site B? Do you want to have NSX Manager instances managed here? It's not really avoidable, but it's predictable. If this is not a very fast connection, you can say, well, if a client logs on here, it's always slow, but if they, yeah. What I'm trying to say here is that you know that if this control plane is managed, this local control plane is managed by the central NSX Manager cluster, they always have to flow through the same path. They always have to flow through the same path. So the path I'm talking about here is they always have to go here. So this is your management network. So I have a lot of traffic going here, but my client goes into one of the instances. Another thing, this is a load balancer. It can be based on AVI, the advanced load balancer. It can be an F5 load balancer. It can be AVI, because if you lose your load balancer, you're still able to bypass the load balancer and go to your NSX Manager directly. But if you use an active load balancer, it also has some benefits, because if you put a host in maintenance mode, you can forward requests to the remaining hosts in the cluster. You have scalability on top of availability. Scalability means that you have 3 instances. This is serving a request, this is serving a request, this is serving a request. So especially in bigger environments, I would recommend using a load balancer. Measuring the health of your NSX Manager instances, very important. This is a crucial part of your data center. If you lose your NSX Manager instances, you don't have any vMotions, but also no new deployments. So you can put an alerting mechanism on here that allows you to detect if one of those manager instances went down. And another benefit is that in most companies, they're using something on top of NSX Manager for demanding networks. vRealize Automation, for instance, or another cloud management platform that will ask vCenter and also NSX Manager to put new VMs on a transport node and connect them to a network so the client is able to reach those VMs. So a lot of companies are using the API, the northbound API of these NSX managers very heavily. And you want to spread the load between those managers because otherwise one manager is overloaded with requests and the other ones are doing nothing. So the big difference between using a single IP hosted on the leader and putting all your requests here is spreading those requests between those instances. Being able to monitor those instances better and also measure the performance. You can see if there were any connection loss. If you are using an AVI load balancer, you have extensive logging and you can do all kinds of nice tricks with persistency, and you can create a pool. And this load balancer will use a service engine, and this service engine, when using AVI, is hosting containers, and those containers are the man in the middle. They will receive the request and forward the request to one of the instances of NSX Manager. So besides using this, which is free, I would go for AVI. If you are running AVI already, then this is a no-brainer. You're using it for your application. Why not using it for your most important application in your whole data center? So that's another thing you can do for availability, for disaster avoidance. And the other thing the takeaway from this is that putting a VM in here on the point where you are about to decide if you want to restore a backup or join a cluster, then this can help you with overcoming the disaster when you lose site A as a whole. Don't try to introduce an old NSX manager into your network after it has left the cluster. Always throw away old managers. Old managers are disjoint and they're done. If you join again, you can have very weird reconciliation things going on, and that's not pretty. So always when you lose one of your managers, power it off, throw it away, or wait a little bit because maybe that's the last manager in your network and then you need it. And then I come back to my first picture. Again, it's not a shame to put it in a remote data center. But again, if you do maintenance, you want to survive a wide area network failure, it's not going to work if your counterpart, where you build a majority with, is in a remote data center, because then you lose majority and you only have 33% of the votes. So that's for now the video I'm showing you. If you have any questions, you can post a comment in the YouTube or on Twitter. And I'm very interested in your opinion, especially because this whole local cache thing is not documented very well. You have to search very hard to find anything about this local cache on the control plane. But from what I've seen is that if you don't have any control plane at all, VMs are able to find each other. Local machines will always find each other, because if the control plane dies and your local control plane or your tab is not able to get an answer from the control plane, flooding will still be done. But only locally, only to tabs in the same subnet. Eric Sloef is signing off.